Namaste. In an earlier video, I talked about the open source movement, open source software movement, and the 4 degrees of freedom that basically drives the whole movement, that allows people to download it, share what has been downloaded with others, to make modifications, to share that modification, and therefore, then a conducive ecosystem is built which encourages the growth of the software. Now, there are obviously a lot of concerns or misconceptions that people have about what this actually means and when does something become open source. So today I want to talk about the eligibility for something to become open source legally. Okay, so one thing we have to understand that open source software is not a piece of code that you write, put it on online somewhere, allowing people to download and use it whatever way they want it, without any accountability of ownership. So every open source software, if it uses the definition or that title open source software, adheres to some licensing terms and conditions. Okay, there are different licensing norms. The most generous one is called the GPL, the GNU Public License, which is the original license. There are derivatives and variants of it, the Mozilla Public License and various other forms have been constituted by various organizations to adopt the GPL with their minimal restrictions. So all of these, around 50 plus licenses you can find on the website, all of these mandates 10 conditions that these licenses must adhere to. Okay. So these conditions are: one, that the source code, the source code of whatever that you are building must be made available as part of the distribution. You cannot give away just the executable and call it open source. I mean, the word open source itself says that the source code is going along with the software. But sometimes people will say, no, I will take the source because it is my program. I remove all the comments, all the indentations, and rename variable names into A1, A2, A3, so that somebody who downloads and who wants to look at it will find it very hard to understand what the software is about. This is not allowed. So one of the mandatory requirements is no attempt to obfuscate or to hide the quality in the code must be practiced. Right? So the code should be made as clean, as well documented, as developer friendly as possible. But remember, our attempt is to make the software as usable, to be usable by as many people as possible, and also to encourage other people to make modifications to extend it, because that is how the software will grow. If you make your code very hard to read, it will die a natural death of its own. Another condition that these terms require is that a free redistribution is permitted and mandated. That if you download the software, you should be able to redistribute or distribute it to as many people, as many places as you like. Okay, there will be no restrictions on redistributing by the person or group who downloads the software. If you make modifications, what can you do with it? There are also requirements that you should make the derived works also available in a suitable open source format. Okay, so if you are making modification to my code, you should make that modification available in a suitable license form, which also complies with this open source philosophy. Because otherwise the modifications will become too constrained, and in order to use the modification, they have to buy licenses or pay money, or has to be platform restricted. This is also not something that we want to do. So derived works also should be following and should be redistributed with the open source compliant license. One concern that many have is that when I write software and I make it available through an open source license, people might take the code, make bad modifications and attribute it to me, or they might misuse that software for whatever purposes, okay, that they might be interested in. So these negativities can actually spoil the open source movement. So therefore, there is one condition, that the integrity of the author source code must be protected. So there are explicit conditions. So what I have given you as the software, you are welcome to adopt it, modify it, but my identity or what I have contributed must be made available as it is. Add-ons and modifications can be distributed by as add-ons or libraries or whatever. Okay, so this distinction we have to basically to make sure that somebody who is generous enough to make the software that they have done into an open source is not getting penalized, because that is necessary for this culture or the system to grow. You are not allowed to make any discrimination against persons, groups or fields of endeavor. Okay, so you cannot put any restriction that this should not be used by this country or this group or this category of people or whatever. This sometimes is worrying people, because you say, no, should I not restrict the software from being used for bad purposes, by bad undesirable elements. Now the argument here is that as a software developer, I should not look at a legal or law enforcement mechanism. That every country has its own law enforcement mechanisms for misuse and unauthorized use of any property. If you do some bad things with the software, acts against any institution and all that, there are laws and systems to protect in the country. So let that take care of it. As developer, I want my software to be as liberally usable and as widely usable as possible. So these are conditions 5 and 6, saying no discrimination against fields of endeavor and or against persons or groups. And there are also additional conditions which says that if you build a software, you should not mandate it saying that this should be run only on Windows platform or only on Oracle system, or even for that matter only on Linux system. Okay, you should not make a mandate in addition to what the software itself requires. If you are developing a software in a platform which is not compatible to a particular OS or a particular database, fine, that is your choice of the platform which will restrict its usage, but that is your choice. But having built something which is usable in generally, I should not make an additional mandate that this should be used only with the software or with this database or with this platform or whatever. Those kind of restrictions should not be followed or imposed by your licensing mechanisms. Okay, so and ideally the license must be technology neutral. So these are some of the conditions that open source software.org group has actually come up with to basically, if you look at the condition, the whole purpose is to encourage the similar mentality or similar mindset usage of the software that is made available to you as open source. So you download it, you are getting something very useful, you are making modifications. Use the same philosophy to contribute it back to the public so that the software grows. And also the fact that because you will not be able to make commercial exploitations and things like that, you will not go take shortcuts and and those kind of channels to optimize the work. The work should be good quality. I'll talk about it in my next video, how that quality is maintained across distributions and across versions and in the open source movement. So the important thing to note is that every open source software has an associated license, and you are respecting that license when you download and make use of the software. And these licenses must comply with those conditions of open source software for it to qualify as an open source thing. So it is not just something that you can randomly distribute. There is adequate safeguards to protect your interests as well as the user's interest, and at the same time propagate the open source philosophy and the movement. So with that, I'll stop today, and in part 3 we'll explore more of this. Thank you. Take care.